Hi everyone, I'm Jolene and I'm the founder and creative director of Access Brand. We are Canada's first disability-led creative agency, and our whole mission is to make design, marketing, and communication accessible to everyone. Today is informal. We're talking about small practical ways that communication can be more inclusive, why it matters in your work, because accessibility isn't just for the built environment, it's also the digital one too. So before I get into more and talk, and I do talk a lot, I want you to think about what you currently know about digital accessibility. Then at the end of the presentation, we could have some time to ask questions if you wanted. So with that, let's get started. So a little bit about Accessibrand. We do have the full spectrum of services, building accessible work from the start, auditing what people already have, fixing barriers, and training teams to keep accessibility going. Everyone on our team has lived disability experience. We feel that it definitely makes our work stronger, more thoughtful, and more human. How do you pitch to someone when you don't have the experience yourselves? So as noted, we do train and support internal teams because we found after many years doing the work, people also want to know how they could implement it. So we consider ourselves a social enterprise in that case, giving back and then having more opportunities for people with disabilities internally. So I want to share a little bit more about me and the why behind Accessibrand. After years and years in design and marketing, so I'm a graphic designer by trade, and I was running my own agency for about 15 years. I've been in the industry over 25, I think now. I faced some really big personal shifts. My youngest daughter, who's featured on the screen with this is an older picture, but she's in the very front of us. She's now 14, and she's in a small inset caption photo with myself. She was born with a rare form of dwarfism, and later I was actually diagnosed myself with something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. So I found that suddenly I was trying to manage caregiving and chronic pain, and I realized most like workplaces, traditional workplaces, including the one I had built for myself, weren't really set up to support what my family needed. So after a lot of, sort of cut and paste and trying to fit in, I couldn't find a workplace that worked with disability in myself and others like me. And I just basically stopped trying to squeeze into the broken systems, and I founded Accessibrand because it could include me, my family, and others like me and other families that were looking for the same type of flexibility. So that's really how Accessibrand was born, and it was to create accessible, inclusive branding solutions and marketing right from the start. And of course, we wanted to create opportunity for people with disabilities. So we also, as mentioned, have everybody on our team have lived disability experience. So the next slide is going to show you a little bit how we've grown since then. But mostly it's I guess inclusive design isn't just for people with disabilities, and that's what we like to talk about a lot. A lot of people think, oh, well, I don't have people who are disabled that are, my target audience. You don't know, number one, but it's not just for people with disabilities. It truly benefits everyone. And the earlier that you build accessibility into your brand, the easier and more natural it becomes, because most accessibility issues aren't created or aren't done or built on purpose. People just weren't taught, just like myself, until it happened to me and I experienced it, I didn't know. So I like to say, when we know better, we do better. But when our communication is clearer and more accessible, it truly helps everyone. If you think about a curb cut, it's not just for wheelchairs, it's for delivery people. It is for wheelchairs, like we mentioned, it's for people with walkers, it's for bicycles, it's for moms with strollers, it's all of those things. So when our communication is clear and more accessible, just like building, it helps everyone. And yes, it absolutely helps improve sales and client satisfaction. So truly, accessibility is good for business. So on the screen, I have a bit of a global map, and it shows statistics around the world, specifically aimed at Canada, and there's another one over top of the other side of the world that shows the global statistic. But imagine, truly, if someone said to you, do you want to increase your sales by like 25%? I don't think you would say no, but that's what people are doing when they don't think inclusively, learn about disability and the benefits of making digital accessibility a big part of what you do. So again, looking at the statistics, 1.3 billion, and it's likely much more, people identify as having a disability. In Canada alone, the latest statistic was 27% of the Canadian population, and then in Ontario it's 2.9 million. So truly, if you found out that you can do something to improve, why wouldn't you do that? One of the other things to look at on the screen is that there are fines. We don't lead with compliance, but if someone complains and it goes through, in Ontario, you're looking at fines of $50,000 to $100,000 per day based on the AODA, which is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act. So if you don't comply, and you need to comply, you could face these fines. And under the Accessible Canada Act, if you are under the mandate of that law, you face up to $250,000 per day. So it's truly important from that perspective, but I don't think that an access brand doesn't believe that just by telling you that you're going to get fined, that you're going to make these positive changes. So think about that from a different lens. So truly, many people think about accessibility only in a physical sense. They think about ramps, they think about elevators, the doors, the buttons, all of that. And I was the same until I found out differently. But the digital side matters just as much, because if someone can't access your website or your document or do something that is a digital or electronic format, it's the same as putting a staircase in front of a ramp. You've done all of these pieces, but then you've completely created a barrier or a blockade. So on the screen, you'll notice that I have its websites. A lot of people know it's websites. They think it's just websites, but it's not. It's PDFs, it's Word documents, it's PowerPoints, it's emails and email newsletters, it's reports, social media. There's a big push for ensuring that social media postings are more accessible, and there's a lot of benefits to that. And then any kind of marketing and client-facing materials, you should have them looked at to make sure that they are digitally accessible. And you can look at it from a print perspective as well, because if you were to print a menu on glossy paper and it's sunny out, nobody can read it anyways. So there's a lot to think about in those cases. So some of the common issues, I guess, in accessibility audits, the ones on the screen, these are the sort of the top issues we see across all industries with most clients. They may seem very small and not important, but they truly do prevent people from getting the information they need. And in many cases, those people are your end customers or your colleagues, and they can't do their job, or they can't participate in, purchasing a product or paying a bill. But the good news is all of these things can be fixed, and most of them can be prevented. So some of the typical barriers, as mentioned, we see low contrast. I think by nature, as anyone who has, full vision or even partial vision, you can see low contrast when it happens. However, there is types of checkers and things like that that can tell you if the contrast is not high enough. So making sure that you're a little bit more diligent, if you have red font on a black background, you can squint on your own and you can see that that's probably going to cause a problem. Or if you have low lighting, it's going to cause a problem. So that's just one example. Text that is too small. As a designer myself, years ago, if you would have told me that I should make things in 12-point font, I probably would have laughed at you. But truly, you need to make things a minimum of 12-point font. When you get into 8-point, 9-point, 10 is standard in some areas, but really 12-point is the rule for accessibility. It's just too small. People don't always know how to increase on a screen, or if you have a document you've created that needs to be printed out, it's too small. No alternative text on images. So this might be new to you, it may not be, but you will see that ALT in capital letters in most platforms is there for you to use, but you don't know what it is. In Word in particular, you do a right click on an image, it'll give you an option to say, alt text. AI can give you some of that, but it doesn't mean that it's probably going to describe it accurately. If you were blind and you were reading a document with a screen reader and it just said image1.jpg, I don't think you would understand the context of that. So if that visual doesn't give you context to the article, then you can make it decorative and it doesn't need to be read. But otherwise, if you use that image, it's good for everyone to understand the reason why. And that's what alt text is about. Videos without captions as well. Let's face it, I think almost all of us, there's statistics that are really very high. I can't remember them offhand, but I think it's over 70% of people actually watch videos with captions now, because we're in environments where we can't have, the sound on and whatnot. So if you have a video without captions, closed captions or transcript, it's really missing the mark for many people, and not just for people with disabilities. PDFs, people think that, oh, I'll just make a PDF, anyone can read it. It's not true. Unfortunately, there is a whole process to make documents accessible, especially PDFs. PDFs are not necessarily usable on larger sizes if they're many, many pages, but if you have smaller PDFs that need to be read by many people, including those with screen readers, they cannot be read typically. So that's something that you'll want to look into, is how to make PDFs accessible. Jargon or complex language. One of the things we advocate for, and it's in the Accessible Canada Act, is plain language. Plain language is not baby language. It's just lower grade levels so that everyone can read it. So as they say, the bigger the tent, the more people you can fit under it. So when you reduce your grade level, just like the newspaper is at about a grade 8 level, more people can understand, including those with English as a second language. So moving on to the next slide. How to build an inclusive and accessible brand. That's a pretty big topic, but on the screen, we mentioned those sort of in the areas that we find often. These are also the building blocks of accessible branding, and also in design principles. As a designer, we learn these, but we're not applying them to accessibility, which is what Accessibrand does. So very small changes can make a big difference for many people. Again, we talked about color contrast, making sure that the contrast is as high as it can be, and to a certain extent. Font choices. You may like a script font because it's pretty, but it doesn't mean it's legible, and leave those for the wedding invitations. So we do have more in-depth training on that type of thing, but a font like Arial is, in a digital environment, far more accessible than something like Times New Roman, because of different characteristics of the font and the way the screens display. Fonts on print are a little bit different, but still the sans serif fonts like Arial and Helvetica seem to be better and pass accessibility in a much larger scale. The way you set up your content, grids and layouts, is very critical to how people intake that information, especially with the spacing in clear space. You might also know it as white space. When you have spacing and clear space around content, it is much easier to read. It's easier for people to intake that information. If you have a page with just stuffed with content, nobody's probably going to take away. So even as something that was like a marketing principle, people used to say, oh, what a waste of space, way back in the newspaper days. Oh, you've put 2 words in the middle of this big ad. You remembered it, you read it, and you moved on. And it's the same thing for accessibility. You see it, you understand it, you can read it, and you can move on. So taking those principles and applying accessibility is really critical. Representation and imagery. We could go a whole hour on that, but most people are using stock photography, or if they're in Canva, they're grabbing whatever Canva has. But truly, the problem, if you want to include anyone with disabilities, and we want you to, is making sure that it's authentic. So when you see, I'd have to say the biggest example is someone in a wheelchair, because most people think wheelchair equals disability, which it doesn't, by the way, but it's most common, is that they just grab a picture of someone in a wheelchair. Often those wheelchairs, unfortunately, are A, someone who's not disabled, and B, a wheelchair that they probably borrowed from a hospital, which is not the kind that people who have true disabilities would use on an everyday basis. There's a lot of different examples we could talk about, but we are very avid and good at including diversity, equity, and inclusion, and LGBTQ2 plus in imagery, but we're not including disability. So make sure that you think about that. And if you're not sure, reach out to the disability community, because we're always happy to discuss that. Again, going back to plain language and readability, making sure that your content is not full of acronyms and complex jargon that people just don't understand unless they work in that work environment. They're just not accessible. And I don't think anyone really loves acronyms at the end of the day, but we all do it inherently. So you have to make sure that you explain it and try to reduce those. But also, one of the things to help you also build that inclusive and accessible brand is to find accessible digital tools. So, for example, in Word, if you didn't know, there's an accessibility checker. So for any of the Microsoft Office tools, and as a designer, I don't use them a lot, but you can check your accessibility. So quick wins that you can start today in your organization or personally that aren't going to cost you a lot of money. You don't need to take a lot of training, but these 5 changes can do a lot of the heavy lifting. They're free. They are pretty much fast and can be done by almost anyone. It doesn't need special software. It's just your awareness and your intention to do better. So again, we talked about alternative text or alt text, ALT. It's in every platform. So go looking for it and, put in what you see in that visual. It doesn't have to be a huge complex saying. If you've chosen a picture of 2 people playing hockey outside, do you just say that? Or is it actually 2 young people playing hockey on a pond outside in the middle of winter with a fire going nearby? So details matter. If those are meant to convey the content, you need to put those into your alternative text. So thinking about, if you can't see, what do you want people to understand? Again, using plain language. Microsoft Office Word has an editor, and it will give you a grade level, so you can use those tools. Grammarly has some pieces set in. Also, another piece in your social media posts is using camel case. It sounds odd, but if you capitalize the first letter of each word in your hashtag, if it's multiple words, it's easier for everyone, and you avoid any maybe inappropriate sayings or anything like that, or misunderstandings. So consider, and please do, use camel case. A lot of the social media platforms will automatically go to lowercase, but take the extra time to make a capital letter on each word of your hashtags, because again, it's easier for everyone to read. And if you think about a screen reader, is it going to say camel case? How is it going to read that out? It doesn't know it's the start of a new word. Again, color contrast. If you want to reach out, there's some free apps that you can use. There's websites that you can, put in your colors, and it will tell you if the contrast is good enough, as well as adding captions or transcripts to videos or complex visuals. These are things that you can do on your own without hiring anyone, without special software, and it's a huge asset and it's a huge benefit. So if you build in accessibility early, because most people are doing it after things are done, and we know that there's band-aids and we're not quite there yet, especially with legislation still changing all the time. It is truly, if you can change your mindset, it's easiest to build into the process at the beginning instead of being tacked on later. There's a stat somewhere that we read that I believe with a website, it might be almost 10 times more expensive to fix problems later than in the beginning. So understanding what you're doing, talking to, any delegates or proponents that you're hiring, procurement processes, things like that, you do need to ask in the beginning. And then you start early, you're going to save time, you're going to save money, you're going to save frustration. And again, you've just made the tent bigger so more people can come in. It truly is the difference between someone living independently and someone not living independently if they can't buy a product, pay a bill, do their grocery shopping, banking, anything like that. And it might sound extreme to say it's the difference between people with disabilities living in poverty, but it's not. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's more consistent, it's better for everyone. And again, it's better for business. So this is where the presentation sort of ends. And I always love to hear people's experiences, whether they're big challenges, small wins, or even questions that you are afraid to ask. But I just want everyone to be able to take away that accessibility is for everyone, and we all need to start somewhere. So just taking a little time at the end of this presentation is, talking about where do you see communication barriers? What's one change you could make this week? How can accessibility support your work? Some of the things that you can do to further your own education and your understanding about digital accessibility and disability in general is obviously you can reach out to us, but if you have friends and family or coworkers that may experience disability in either a small or big way. It doesn't mean they have to be in a wheelchair. Someone with ADHD, someone with a family member with autism, someone that uses a cane, someone who's blind. Don't be afraid to ask. I think it's truly important to the disability community, and I'm part of that, is to say that, you asked. I'm willing to share that information because I want my life to be better. It seems a lot of people are afraid to ask those questions. You could reach out into groups online. There's, between Facebook and LinkedIn, there's different areas. And I know those people are there so you can ask, maybe connect with not-for-profits or CNIB, March of Dimes, things like that. There's a lot of resources where you can learn. LinkedIn Learning has some resources. We have resources. There's also free courses online, just learning about digital accessibility. Whatever you can do to change your mindset and to help you change your working processes when you're developing, any type of content or working with your internal teams, it's only a benefit. So take the time to ask the questions, reach out, and don't be afraid, because accessibility is something that we all want to change together for the better. I'm always available. I'm just an email away. So if you ever want help, please consider contacting us or emailing me, because accessibility is a journey and you don't have to do it alone. So thank you.